We are now recording. Good evening. I hope you're all doing well. Oh, hold on. I've got the wrong PowerPoint up. Darn.
Media law and ethics.
That's another class entirely. Okay, let me get that up. Bonus lecture. All right, now we'll start. There we go. That's tonight's chat. Oh, hold on. All right, now we will share. All right, sorry about that. Gotten a little better at Zoom that technical difficulties do not automatically sync the chat now like they used to. So anyway, good evening, everybody. Brian here. This is Zoom chat number 7, our second chat on media and race. And got several of you here tonight. Upcoming in the class, we move into Module 8. Starting on Saturday morning at a little after midnight. I'm sure you'll all be up then, eagerly awaiting to start work on the module. Please know that we will have our deadline for that module a week from tonight, Thursday the 27th at 11:59 p.m. This will also be the module where you'll complete your final gender, race, class, and media analysis. We're going to talk about your second ones here in a bit tonight, but your next one will be due by next Thursday night because that's the deadline for the module. And then finally, we'll have our chat on Wednesday the 26th. So 6 nights from tomorrow night at 8 p.m. And as we've done throughout, please let me know by 6 p.m. Wednesday night if you plan to attend. So our agenda for Module 7 is we're going to recap analyses. We're going to talk a little bit more about white privilege and the book White Fragility, which you finished up for this week. We're going to get in some more time talking about Tim Wise's White Like Me film. And then we'll also focus on the questions of cultural appropriation and also what do people get all up in a bunch for when we name sports teams, college, high school, and professional sports teams after Native American names. It is just a game, right? It's just a name. Get over yourself. So we're gonna talk about that tonight. So anyway, that's where we're gonna go. First of all, I'm gonna call in some people to talk about their analysis number 2, and the first one is Danielle. And Danielle, this is you want to talk about Katie Sauer, right?
Correct. So this is one of the commercials that was on during the Super Bowl, and it's Microsoft's sponsoring it, and practically she's the first woman to coach in the Super Bowl. And so I thought it was surprising but honoring because you wouldn't think that millions of people are watching that they would honor a woman in this day and age. So.
I assume you think it's a good thing that a woman is now coaching in the NFL?
Correct.
How long till we have a woman head coach in the NFL?
Probably another decade.
You think it'll happen that soon?
I don't think a decade's that soon.
Well, I suppose that's the difference between being 20 and being 60. I think a decade's pretty fast, maybe because I'm near the end of my decades. But the point is football. Boy, football is pretty much the most hyper masculinized sport that there is. Do you think a woman would have any I guess challenges in ascending to the highest coaching positions of the National Football League?
Yes, there's always problems because a lot of people, even my stepfather, said that, women are strong enough. They're not capable of playing in the NFL. So I feel like even as a coach, they're going to look at a girl or a woman as not capable of or not knowing anything about football. And
We don't have any male students in the room tonight, but I would love to have some of our football players in the room and ask them if they would take instruction from a female coach. What do you think that would, how do you think that would play out at Simpson?
I feel like they would say yes in the chat, but there's always going to be some.
You don't think they would be honest?
No.
No. Okay. I sent you a link, and I don't know if you got a chance to watch it, or maybe you already knew it, that woman on the U.S. women's national soccer team, Carly Lloyd, worked out this past summer in training camp with, I think, both the Chicago Bears and the Philadelphia Eagles, and she kicked field goals of 50-plus yards. Would you envision a time when a woman actually does play either college football or NFL football?
I feel college is more likely because college is expanding and getting more diverse as we speak. NFL, I feel like unless the generation dies off, no one's going to change their mind about it. So.
Well, the generation eventually will die off, but it will probably take, I mean, the youngest football fans now will probably live for another 70 years or so. So if we do the math, that'll be about 2090. You think we'll see women in the NFL by the year 2090? If there's still an NFL, by the way.
I hope so. I feel like that's, in my eyes, that's what I view it, because
Right.
there's still so many stereotypes right now, and
Right.
only the newer generations are gonna change them.
Clearly, I mean, to come back to the ad and Katie Sowers, not only did the NFL make this or Microsoft, the sponsor of the ad, make this a major ad in the Super Bowl, but of course the NFL is quite interested in good publicity related to social justice items. The NFL fan base is, and this is not speculation, this is based on marketing research, is by far the most politically conservative professional sports fan base that there is, with the possible exception of professional wrestling. But it is a very hyper masculinized area. And of course, that has had negative consequences in terms of player violence against women, against CTE, etc. And so good for Katie Sowers. Hopefully we'll see more Katie Sowers on the sidelines in the years to come. So anyway, Danielle, thank you for that analysis. Danielle Blake, you're there. I really love this ad. Can you talk about it? Danielle Blake, you still there?
Yeah, sorry, I clicked the wrong button to unmute
Oh, that's all right.
myself.
Tell us about this ad. I love this ad.
Yeah, so I think this one might have also been aired during the Super Bowl, but I could be wrong. I just saw a bunch of
I did not see this during the Super Bowl, and I watched the whole game.
Okay, then I'm definitely wrong about that. I just saw
Oh.
a bunch of articles on it, like right after the Super Bowl, so I just assumed. But I guess it was just a coincidence of when the ad campaign was launched. But it would also make sense not during the Super Bowl, because Starbucks UK launched this ad campaign called "What's Your Name?" or hashtag "What's Your Name," and the whole point of it was like to promote trans visibility, I guess. And in this specific advert, we have this this transgender teenager who is consistently like being misgendered by like friends, family, doctors. And then at the very end of the advert, he goes to Starbucks and they ask for his name, and he's able to use his actual name rather than his dead name. So it seemed to be a lot more about like recognizing people who are transgender, especially young people.
Right. This ad, in fact, runs for Starbucks in the UK. I have not seen this ad in the United States, and I asked you this question, but I stand corrected if this ad or a version of it is running in the United States. In this particular ad, the individual that you see on the screen was born with the name of Gemma, Jemma, and has chosen the name of James to reflect his gender identity. And the point is throughout, right? Teachers, dad, friends are calling him her, which is really annoying to him until he goes to a Starbucks where, by the way, maybe this is kind of a romantic era in Starbucks history where they actually write your name on the cups. They don't even do that in America anymore. They always put this computer label on it now. But James finally gets identified at a Starbucks as James, and that makes James's day. And good for James. Has anyone seen this ad on American TV, maybe, or a version of it with this particular actor? Has a very British accent, so I don't think that this particular actor would play well to an American audience, regardless of gender identity. But has anyone seen an ad or like this in America, making transgender people visible? I'm not hearing anyone about it, at least. Does that, I mean, what's that say? Maybe we're not as, I don't know, woke on transgender issues in America as they might be in Britain?
This is Shira. I wouldn't
Hello,
necessarily.
Shira.
Yeah, sorry, I got on kind of late, a little
That's
bit
fine.
after 8. I don't think it's that we're not woke. I just think it's like it's not as accepted maybe right now. I mean, for whatever reason that is, it just is probably not accepted. I think we all are aware though that it exists.
Well, absolutely exists. The question is, when does it become a selling point, right? That you can market a product around it. Advertisers, they may personally feel a need to strike blows for transgender rights, racial equality, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, their job is to sell a product, and they're not going to step over a line that they think is going to actually hurt the product or hurt its branding. So that's one of the things companies think about. Clearly, Starbucks, which by the way has generally in its history identified with, for lack of a better term, social justice ideals, has been out front on a lot of these ideals. So it's an interesting ad. By the way, if you just want to Google "what's your name," hashtag "what's your name," and maybe throw in a UK after it, I'm sure this ad will come up. But I thought it was a very cool ad. I would love to see a version of this in the United States. And one of the things that this ad does, I should add, Danielle, and I don't want to hijack your analysis or your commentary, but it really just demonstrates the normality of transgender individuals. They are people like you or me. And my further argument is that since the Obergefell decision in the Supreme Court in 2015, hard to believe that's been 5 years ago, transgender rights has kind of become the line in the sand between cultural progressives and cultural conservatives. And cultural conservatives are not going to give an inch on this. They've been forced to accept gay marriage, but they will fight tooth and nail against transgender acceptance. And maybe that's not the case in Britain. I hope it's not the case in Britain. I hope it's eventually not the case here. Anything else you want to add about this ad, Danielle? For example, how did you find this? If you're not an American, how did you find this? You are an American. If you're not British, how did you find this?
So I mean, it's not like a great website, but I waste a lot of time on BuzzFeed, and BuzzFeed wrote an article on it.
I like BuzzFeed.
Yeah, so I got to it from a BuzzFeed article. It was really interesting because I went to the Starbucks UK website, and they had a whole article to go with this advert, where they also listed a bunch of different other people and their stories of being misgendered or using dead names, and also how they launched a cookie in the bakery at the UK Starbucks, with the proceeds are going to go to a specific charity that supports transgender rights.
Interesting. All right. Thank you, Danielle. Reagan, are you in the room? You were going to be in the room. Are you in the room?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello, Reagan. How are you?
Good.
This is what you wrote about this week. Tell us more about it.
So essentially it's just about how Jane Fonda, she's in her 80s, she's not going to have any more plastic surgery, and she's working towards accepting herself and what she looks like, and just, yeah.
Is I hate to sound old, but is Jane Fonda even a thing to people of your approximate age range?
I would say so. I mean, I know she's in a lot of movies. She has a Netflix series that I really liked, and that's why I
Oh, good.
picked this article. But so
Yeah. I mean, good for Jane Fonda. She has remained Hollywood relevant well into her 80s. As you said, I believe she's 82. She has been in movies since the late 1950s, which, by the way, was when your instructor was born in 1959. I think that was the year Jane Fonda made her first movie. Good thing for someone to say, I'm not going to do no more plastic surgery.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Have you had a lot of plastic surgery, Reagan?
no,
No, none?
no.
No. Do a lot of the question I guess I would have, and again, I ask this from the perspective of while I am married, I have never had any sisters and I never had any daughters. So other than my wife, I don't walk in these circles. Is plastic surgery something that women commonly undergo in our middle class Iowa life?
Not in the middle class, I would say no.
No. I mean, ever? I mean, is it like, oh, I'll get a nose job, I'll get I don't know, a jaw job, a boob job, whatever.
I've known my aunt has had some plastic surgery, and one of my friends in high school got her nose done.
No.
Yeah, and she's not from a very well-off family, but I think that she had a deviated septum, so she had to do it anyways. So while she was doing it, they shaved her nose down a little bit.
So there was a legitimate health reason for it
Yeah.
beyond just, I want my nose to look different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The question I asked you, Reagan, on this is it kind of easy for an 82-year-old woman to say, I ain't going to do that no more?
Yeah, way easier than like a 20-something celebrity.
Right. I mean, if Scarlett Johansson said, I ain't going to do this no more, not that I know whether she has or hasn't, but what if Scarlett Johansson or, I don't know, Kim Kardashian said, no more plastic surgery? That would be would that be a earth shaker?
I would say so, because they still have to maintain this image of beauty through the aging process, where Jane Fonda's kind of already there.
Right. I mean, Jane Fonda is 82, and I mean, after a while, you get to a point where you say, how much more money can I make? Anyway, very good point. I mean, there are, by the way, less discussed in the culture, but lots of male celebrities have cosmetic procedures, as we call them. I never, look at me, I've never had any cosmetic procedures. I will tell you, a story is that about 15 years ago, I had a colleague at Simpson College who underwent plastic surgery, cosmetic surgery, and died in it. It was one of those bizarre situations where she had a stroke in the middle of her surgery and literally died. Nobody even knew she was having surgery. You don't go trot it out, oh yeah, I'm going into the hospital on Friday, to have a facelift or whatever. But anyway, it always kind of interests me about how stars such as Jane Fonda probably has had many, 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 many plastic surgeries over the years in order to retain a certain identity. So anyway, anything to add about that, Reagan?
I'd say just in general, like that we still are focusing on like looks and stuff, and rather than like seeing articles about all the good work she's doing in regards to climate change. Because when I saw her name pop up, I was like, oh, here's an article, because I knew from like watching things on TV that she was, but it's plastic.
Right. Okay. Let's see, who's next? Paulina. You chose to comment on the consent is, it's simple as tea. How many of you have seen this? Because this has got about 4 million views or so on YouTube. Paulina, had you seen this before?
I had.
Yeah. Before you took the class?
while ago.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Just real
Yeah.
quick, give us a shout out, everyone else other than Paulina. Have you seen this video or heard about this video before?
Danielle Blake has.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Reagan.
Kylie has.
yeah. Reagan has, Kylie has,
I have Amelia.
Amelia. Is there anyone who hasn't? Shara, have you seen it?
Sorry, no, I haven't.
Okay, that's fine. Paulina, to walk for the people who have not seen it, could you walk us through what it is? Because in a certain way, it's kind of like, in my view, a kind of an oh duh video. But go ahead.
Which is, I think, the point. So basically, it says that if you invite somebody to your house and you offer to make them tea and they say, sure, I'd love some tea, you can make them tea. But if they say, no thanks, you don't make them tea. And
don't
if they
shame
come
them.
over next week and they had, yeah. And if they come over next week and decide to have tea, that doesn't mean they have to have tea every time they come over. It just kind of compares the concept of sexual consent to consent about anything, especially something as simple as offering a beverage.
Right. You you say, do you want a tea? No, I'm not really a tea drinker. Oh, okay. Thank you. Would you like something else? No, not really. I'm fine. I'm good. And it would be literally insane for me at that point to walk up to this guest in my home and like try to force tea down her throat, or, God knows whatever horror I would apply just so she would drink tea. Right. So, and by the way, this is, would you say this is an effective way to get people to think about the idea of consent in a sexual relationship?
Definitely, because I feel, especially in a society that focuses so much on victim blaming and saying, well, we had sex before, so that means we can have sex all the time. She said okay once. So I think especially in that, kind of relationship, it's really important to say, no, you have to have consent every time. Just because I wanted tea yesterday doesn't mean you get to pour it in my mouth today.
Do you remember the question I asked you when I replied to your analysis and sent you back a rubric with your score? Do you remember the question I asked you?
Oh, what was
It's
it?
fine if you didn't. It was
I don't.
basically, this, like I said a minute ago, this is kind of an oh duh thing. But here we are in a chat room tonight on the internet with 6 or 7 all-female students and a male instructor. And again, all 5 of the people who dropped this course at the beginning of the course were male, traditional aged undergraduate students. No females dropped this course. All males dropped this course. The question I had for you about this video, Paulina, was of the 4 million people who watched this video, could you give me an idea what percentage of you think have been men? You could just give me a guess. I'm not
Less than a third, probably.
Less than a third. I think if it was a third or anywhere close to a third, I would be really impressed. I think maybe 10% of those who watch this video are men. And so we hit on this topic last week a little bit, but why do you think so few men would watch this?
It's easy for men to ignore something that kind of rocks their boat. Right. So traditionally, like, men are encouraged to have as much sex as they can with as many women as they can in any way that they can. So the idea of consent being a necessary part of that every single time kind of throws a wrench in it. So if they can just kind of block it out and go with the flow of how things kind of have always been in the past, right, it's easier, and they don't have to even feel guilty. I
Right.
think a lot of men don't realize how serious it is when someone doesn't necessarily fight back. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's still rape, even if it's not violent.
I am part of a group on our
And
campus.
so,
Yeah, go ahead.
no,
No,
you're
go
fine.
ahead,
Go
Pauline.
for it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think just like being aware of consent really can bring about some guilt in a lot of men who maybe have acted in ways that aren't necessarily the most gentlemanly.
Well, that's a very polite way to put it, Paulina. Let me tell you about something we've been working on at the college. We have noticed that as we have tried to step up our efforts to educate our community on issues of sexual violence and consent, that when we have an event on campus to discuss these issues, we usually get a pretty good crowd, which we're pleased with. But more than 90% of those in attendance are women, and very few men can come. In fact, we had one event last academic year where less than 10 out of about 100 students who attended were male students. And of those 10 male students, 5 were out gay students. So at most, there were maybe 5 straight male students in the room. Now, you ventured a theory, Paulina, which I think there's a lot of merit to, that the issue with consent is, well, you know, we live in a culture where men are, you know, well, we talked about the 3 P's of masculinity, right? Production, procreation, and protection. And procreation, of course, relates to sex, and we kind of socialize men to have, as we've said, sex with as many women as possible, as often as possible, in whatever way possible. That is the end goal of a relationship, or whatever the case may be. But you know, when I talk to young men on our campus, here's what they tell me. So help me understand this. I have never sexually assaulted anyone. I respect boundaries. Of course, I would never have sex with a young woman on our campus without consent. So, by the way, I have no reason to doubt them. So why wouldn't they watch a video like this? If they agree that consent is as simple as tea, what's wrong with investing 3 or 4 minutes in a video like this?
I think in general, most men understand the concept,
Right.
but in certain situations, it's not necessarily adding up. So if they go out to a party and everyone is drinking and having a good time, and he finds a girl and they go back to an apartment or whatever, if she's too drunk, that's not consent.
Right.
And a lot of men would rather ignore that, I think.
Yeah, yeah. But here's, I mean, even if we say, you know what, here's a guy who actually is sensitive to these issues and is not going to take a young woman who's had too much to drink anywhere, but he's still not going to come to this event. And here's my theory as to why. They don't have to worry about giving consent. Consent's not their problem. You know, and I got other things to do. There's a football game on tonight. I got a video game to play. I got a test to study for. I got bros to hang out with, right? You know, I'm no rapist, but, you know, I don't want to get another lecture about all of this. But now we are, by the way, we're trying some new stuff that I'm hopeful will have some results. And actually, we're having some meetings next week on this. But what the point is, I think, Paulina, first of all, thank you for sharing this video. I think it's a great video. And if you've already seen this, that's fine. But if you haven't seen this, I encourage you to just Google "consent is as simple as tea," and this video will come up. It's very popular on YouTube. But you know, one of the things that's really interesting about these conversations is how we all say we're interested in this conversation, but again, look at our room tonight. I see a lot of females in this room tonight, and other than your instructor, I see no males. So, and in fact, as a male and as a former undergraduate student, I can tell you that I would not want to be part of this conversation. I don't think I could win this conversation. So I'm just not going to take part in it. So anyway.
This is Vanessa. Could I add to that?
Hey, good evening, Vanessa.
Hi. I was just thinking about what you said about why certain like males don't show up to these talks. And just intuitively, when I think about it, I feel like there's not everybody, but almost two categories of men who don't do that, who are sensitive and good and are aware of the issues and feel that this conversation is just almost frustrating because they can't imagine it. So they kind of dismiss it. And then there's the second group of men who have done this and, you know, have gotten away with it or been involved with it in any way, and it's triggering. So obviously they don't want to admit to being a part of that conversation. And for the men that haven't done these things, I think sometimes maybe it feels not insulting, I don't want to say, that's not the word, but almost as if they're being set up as their predators. So having that conversation about consent can be triggering for them in that way, because they don't want to be put in the light of being a predator in this conversation in a room full of women. So that can be intimidating. And then on the other hand, the men who have committed something disgusting like that obviously don't want to face their demons in a room full of women. So that's just kind of my take on that.
No, I think you're right, Vanessa. I think that also when we watched, I believe it was a couple of modules ago, we watched the film The Empathy Gap. You know, one of the things that we socialize men to do, whether or not, you know, they respect consent ideals, is, well, this just isn't my problem. You know, it's your problem, Vanessa, and every other woman in this room. You know, I'm not going to get sexually assaulted, and I'm not going to talk to one of my bros about it. You know, that would be to break the bro code. And that's not to say that I would stand by idly if I saw a sexual assault going on, but I would probably wait until I saw it going on before I would be moved to act. Whereas I'm not going to have that conversation about the inherent sexism throughout our culture, from our institutions down through our relationships. And so I think that's one of the things that's going on here. I look out, you know, when I look out at the young men I teach, I see a lot of good, solid individuals. But at the same time, again, they're part of, as we keep talking about, the ideology of masculinity, and one of which, right, we said, who discovered water? Well, we don't know who, but it wasn't a fish, because water is normal to them. Who's going to critique masculinity? Typically, it's not a man, because that's the water they swim in. And so that's, you know, I think we have a long way to go, and it's not just a Simpson thing. It's not just a university thing. It's the entire culture at that. So anyway, anyone else have anything to add about this? Or Paulina, any last thoughts before I go on? Excellent. Kylie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
love this
wanted
ad.
to do, yeah, I saw it during the Super Bowl, and it kind of took me aback, and then it made me think about it more a little bit. And I wanted to do something on the masculinity script, because I did something about women for the last analysis.
Right.
And so yeah, so if you haven't seen this ad, it's about Jason Momoa, and it's a Rocket Mortgage loan ad. And Jason Momoa shows up in all his Aquaman glory and whatnot, and he just starts. He talks about like being at home and being able to be in his own skin and stuff, and he takes off like these boots that have like 4-inch lifts in them, and then he starts like ripping off all of his muscles and taking off his hair and everything, and so he's left with this like super scrawny balding image of Jason Momoa. And so I thought it was interesting that they aired it during the Super Bowl, which is football and almost all of America and just very masculine and everything. And then two, like they took one of the most masculine figures in our culture today. They took a superhero and someone who's super tall and ripped and all of that, and made them kind of, it's a fake body and everything, but was like, hey, men sometimes put on this face when they're out in the public, and that they have to be big and muscular and protector and everything, but when they want to go home, they just not want to be all of that, and they want to just be in their own skin. And
Just like
but
women.
yeah.
Right.
And so it was just kind of a neat idea, and I think it was a good ad to put out there that, it also kind of makes you think like, oh, well, what if he walked out into the real world like that? How would he be treated? He definitely wouldn't be famous and stuff like that. But then also, like, why do we expect men in general to do that anyway? So
Yeah. I remember seeing this ad live as a broadcast, and I was honest to goodness, I said, somebody in my class is going to bring this up at some point. So I thought it would be sooner than now, but I am very glad that you brought this up. One of the things it illustrates, I think, is that while there is a script, as we've said, for femininity, there is very definitely a script for masculinity. It may not involve multiple plastic surgeries, as Jane Fonda has undergone, but certainly there's a bodybuilding element, hyper masculinity affect element to it, and this really, I think, helps call that into the open, if for no other reason to say, we should be looking at the images of men just as much as we are looking at the images of women. Yeah. So, the interesting thing is every year when I teach this, and I teach it in T3, usually Super Bowl commercials are a great way to raise these issues. And of course, this ad, you just see the ad, you don't even have to take this class, and you realize, wow, what's going on here, right? Now here, hopefully we have kind of some structure to think about it. So anyway, anything else you want to add about it, Kylie, or anyone else?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, some of the other commercials, like when I'll go and watch TV and stuff, I noticed that just in general, I've noticed that some of the commercials are getting away from telling women what they have to be, and there's a little bit more inclusivity. Obviously, it's still very like sexualized and stuff, but it's a little more inclusive. But I've seen more and more commercials where it's about women telling their husbands that their body sucks and they need to do better, kind of a thing. And so it was just kind of interesting to see that be corrected.
Kind of the reverse Peloton ad, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else on this ad? I assume most of you saw this if you watched the Super Bowl, because I gave you the night off from chatting that night, if you'll recall. So anyway, okay, what do we have next? We have Sammy. Are you there? You said you would be here.
Yes, I am here.
Hello, Sammy.
Hi.
You talked about this movie, which is an oldie but goodie. Hard for me to believe this movie is almost 15 years old, but you wanted to talk about the movie She's the Man, right?
Yep. So you mentioned in one of our previous chats that somebody used the movie The Hate U Give, and with this I immediately thought of She's the Man.
Right.
I haven't seen that recently yet. So I don't remember exactly what the prompt was, but in my essay, I just kind of go on about how Viola is really good at soccer. Her school ends the soccer program for women, and then they don't let the woman join the men's. So she
Right.
pretends to be her brother for a few weeks so she can kick these guys' butts at one of their tournaments. And in the middle of the game, her identity is revealed, but they're like, whatever, it's a crazy world. Let's just see how it goes. And she ends up winning. So that's fun. And of course, there's
Of
a
course.
little story in there as well.
Of course.
I
And I,
also wrote about how even though this movie is from 2006, that it's still very like obvious that women are getting discriminated against and with like stereotypes in sports because women aren't good enough, women aren't like women's sports are boring, but then like that's not true at all. Like women do kick ass, as Viola shows.
right.
And
Right.
it's always men saying those things too, that women suck.
Somebody tried to make the argument, I don't think anyone here will, that that watching the US women's national soccer team is one speck less entertaining than watching the men. And by the way, maybe that's partly because the women win and the men don't. But I seriously, I mean, 3-4 years ago, I took a group to England and we went to the Women's FA Cup final. Several members of the U.S. women's team were playing in the FA Cup final in Britain. There's 67,000 people there. It was the highest attended professional soccer game in the history of the United Kingdom at Wembley Stadium in London. And I got to tell you, that game rocked. That was absolutely marvelous. And yet, you know, our women have to go to court to get paid what men do. And the argument of USA Soccer is that, well, there's just less value in women's soccer, you know, and fewer people watch it, and we can't do anything about it, so we're going to pay you less. So would you, by the way, Sammy, I don't know, what would you make of that argument? There's less money to be made from women's soccer, so women's soccer gets paid less money. Women's soccer players get paid less than men, even though our men suck and our women are world champions.
I would agree with that. I'm pretty sure that's true. Like men only get paid so much because there's so many, like they're sponsored so much, and they are they have so many people going to every single one of their game because it doesn't matter what their gender is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, okay. Women's sports rule. So get out and support women athletes. Okay, I think that's it. I want to talk for a few minutes about, this is our week to wrap up White Fragility. Any thoughts on the book as we wrap up the book? She writes a lot about white privilege, about, again, this notion that not only are whites privileged, but whites don't want to talk about their privilege. And because they don't want to talk about their privilege, they don't really have to confront. I mean, this is the racial version of men not wanting to talk about consent. This is about white people not wanting to talk about the fact that they're white and that they've kind of gotten a better deal in life because of it. Any thoughts about the book?
This is Paulina.
Hello.
My favorite part of the book was in one of the last chapters when she talked about, there's a couple things. She talked about white fragility as bullying, that section. And then when she brought in her own experience about how even as somebody with her mindset and her knowledge and her experience dealing with racism and white fragility, like she still makes mistakes. That anecdote about her work meeting where she made a faux pas and she admitted that and she took the criticism without, you know, being upset about it and making it about her feelings and her problems with her actions. She really took ownership of that. And I think putting that out there really made everything else she wrote more relatable.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's one of the things. And she's trying to model what she thinks that white people should do generally is, first of all, engage in an honest conversation and understand, look, when you criticize something I've said or I've done, you're not criticizing me as a human being. You're criticizing the fact that I may think or say or do what I do because of my position in a racial hierarchy. And I don't need to take that as a personal affront. I should take it as a moment of reflection to think about, well, maybe you have a point there, you know? Because as I constantly remind myself, and I tell people, there are a hell of a lot of advantages that I have because I am white, I'm male, I am straight. I've been able to secure an advanced education. I've got a senior rank of the faculty of a selective liberal arts college. There's a lot of power that comes with that. And, you know, I try to live a good life. I try to live a life of justice, but I know there's sometimes I fail, and we just need to be open to that. Other thoughts about white fragility?
Yeah, Vanessa here. Right when you said this is kind of the same thing as men in the consent video, it really just struck with me that white privilege and white people, it's the same thing as, oh, it doesn't affect me, so it's not my problem, so I'm not gonna think about it. And when we watched the video with Rob and D'Angelo speaking about it, I noticed like a lot of feelings of like getting triggered coming up, and like, I'm not racist, like, does this woman know what she's talking about? And then just doing what she said and calming down and asking like why this is coming up, and her saying, I'm in this position, I have all of the privileges of being a white person, and she still like, sat and did this research and took the time to do this. And the same thing going for consent, women can say it all day. We can say like, obviously we need consent, whatever, but it's other men that are also going to have to stand up for that, just like white people are going to have to stand up against bigotry and racist actions.
I think that's a huge point, Vanessa.
Yeah.
But it's not just enough for a man to say in a relationship with a woman, yes, let's wait for consent. Let's consent.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly willing to, make you comfortable with this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a point at which men have to engage other men in this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, and not in a lecturing way, but just, be willing to talk about it.
Yeah.
When you're in a position of power, either gender power, racial power, or as we're going to start next week, class power, a lot of times you just don't need to talk about those things because your position in the hierarchy is presumed. So why would I want to waste time talking about white privilege? And indeed, a lot of times what you hear, right, over the last, 5 or 10 years in the country, what the hell, there is no white privilege. I work hard for all of the privileges I get in my life. And in fact, as a working class person, I get no privilege, which of course is not true. But people don't want to hear that. They want to hear about the ways that they're being oppressed. So anyway, I always find it really interesting. But once a year, the Gallup organization asks, I wish I had looked up this data tonight, polls, 1,000+ people and ask if discrimination against whites is a thing and if it's a serious problem. And less than 10% of non-whites say it is, but about 50% of whites insist they are being discriminated against.
Yeah.
Ah!
I know. And one of the things that was called out about it was scholarships for whites versus other races. And I'm just going to admit it here. I was actually quite embarrassed because it called me out. I was like, gosh, I feel like there's all of these scholarships specifically for like a race or, a background. And, I was like, I lived a hard life. I grew up a hard way and I'm still working hard and there's no specific scholarship for me. And then when she showed like the statistics of the amount of white people who get scholarships versus the amount of Hispanics or Blacks, it was bone chilling to me. And it made me, there's a million things in this book that you could talk about that they're takeaways. And what came to me was, that one little thing really bothered me as a white person. And just to use that as like a reason not to acknowledge what people of color are faced with every day, all the time, it blew my mind. And it just really reminded me to keep perspective and keep reminding yourself, even when you feel like it's an attack on you, it's not. And back to what, like I said in the beginning, that we are essentially in a position of power with our white privilege. And it's really, you know, it's up to everybody here, but it's really up to us to stand up for that and to take a new perspective and to fight for the equality for all races.
And one of the things, Vanessa, you might be forgiven, is, well, I think I'm getting the shaft because all these people of color are getting these scholarships because they're people of color. And, you know, and that's kind of a dominant narrative in media,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in the highly polarized times in which we live. But when you actually do the research and you actually arm yourself with facts, you realize, well, yeah, there are some scholarships that go to African Americans or Hispanic Americans on the basis of their skin color or their ethnicity. But when you look into it, it's like less than 1% of all the dollars that are awarded. Less than 1%. And so it's actually, yes, it is a thing, but it's a little teeny tiny thing, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Any other thoughts about white fragility? We didn't get to talk much about Tim Wise's White Like Me last week, but I would just say really quickly, and I'll check in for a second if you have any other contributions in the film, that essentially, you know, he made the film. He actually wrote a book first titled White Like Me, and then made a film based on the book, in which he says, you know, he's always, as a white person, said, I've always tried to be in a black skin. You know, and understand what it would be like to be discriminated against because I was black. But he said that then I realized that nobody ever thinks about what it's like to be white, right? Because we don't think that white is a race. What does that mean? What does that mean? And what other takeaways might you have taken from the book?
Danielle Blake here.
Yep.
I believe it was this documentary, but what I found really interesting about it was like when he had like a bunch of college students or like younger people who are white, and he asked them like, what does it mean to be white versus like what does it mean to be black or something like that, and like none of them could define like any aspects of a culture of like being white. Like I remember one girl even said like, well, when you ask me like what does it mean to be white, I think about like sitting down and having dinner with my family, but everyone does that. So I feel like when you're part of a majority, like you see yourself as part of the majority and everyone else is just other, if
Right.
that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, you're the normal, right? And because you see a lot of people who look like you, that's the normal. And you, and as Tim Wise says, and so you actually fool yourself into thinking that you don't have a race. Race is something that other people have. You're just human, right? And the typical script, again, for a lot of white America is, and race has been invented for the purpose of making people feel aggrieved and that they need to take something away from me. So, yeah. Any other thoughts about White Like Me? Okay. So has anyone ever come across the subject of cultural appropriation before? This is a term that 10 years ago, I don't think anyone had heard of, and it's kind of creeping into the discussion now. Does the photo give you any hint as to what cultural appropriation might be?
Oh,
Go ahead, Amelia.
oh, okay. I was gonna say, yeah, it's taking artifacts of another culture and using them for your own personal gain without realizing the meaning behind them or realizing the history behind them, and just using them as like a fashion statement or to be like cool.
Yeah, and so you're absolutely right, but what's wrong with wanting to be cool by wearing a Native American headdress?
Because they're not taking into account the history behind the headdress and the fact that up until the 60s it was illegal to practice Native American religion. And there's still a lot of restrictions against it. Like, they're ignoring the actual history that goes along with it, and they're not appreciating it. They're just taking it and claiming it.
Right. Cultural appropriation can be explained by the image you see in front of you. But let me tell you a little bit in the history of rock and roll that might explain this to you. You probably have heard of Elvis Presley, right? I would assume, right? Even though I may be the only person to have shared this earth at the same time that Elvis was with us. But Elvis became huge in the mid-1950s. And one of his huge early hits was You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog. So maybe you can conjure up in your mind, regardless of your age, you probably heard this song. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. Heard that song? Okay. Elvis turned it into a massive million-selling single that vaulted him into fame and fortune. But what most people don't know is that Elvis Presley did not write that song. In fact, Elvis Presley was not the first person ever to sing that song and have it recorded. We're not going to do it here, but I would encourage you at some point to go to YouTube and search for the following: Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog, the song, with the artist being Big Mama Thornton, who was an R&B singer in the 1940s and 1950s. She is the one who was the first person to sing You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog. And it is a song written from the point of view of an African-American woman who's upset that her man has been hound dogging all night and crawling back home after having a little too much company of other women and a little too much to drink. And it was essentially a feminist text eventually. But of course, it gets covered by Elvis and it becomes huge. Whereas the white middle-class Americans who listened to it, the song was actually stripped of its meaning. And so when you see this red hair dyed woman, Northern European woman wearing a headdress, you say in one sense, well, that's cool. And you might even say that's nice of her to respect Native American culture, but she probably has no idea, nor do we, what the significance of this particular form of headdress is. That's what we mean by cultural appropriation. When members of a dominant, what cultural appropriation is when members of a dominant cultural group borrow, or shall we even say sometimes steal, cultural expressions originated and innovated by members of subordinate groups. And by the way, that's not always a problem, other than when it is stripped of its original meaning, its historical context, and its place in a struggle of power relations, and simply used for commercial gain. So have you come across this at all? I mean, people coating themselves in tattoos that just look cool and not knowing what the significance of the tattoos are. That's a form of cultural appropriation. Doing your hair up in cornrows and dreadlocks without having any idea what those mean. That's fine that you do it. You may be innocent. I didn't know. That's not a problem. But the problem is that, again, from a position of power, cultural power, you don't have to confront what that was all about at all. So that brings us to, and we're almost out of time, but I wanted to, we all know this. The Washington NFL franchise has now for probably 30 years taken a lot of hell for its nickname. The owner of the team, Danielle Snyder, refuses to change the name. The fans refuse to allow the team to change the name. And so I just asked this question: why do we get all worked up about this? It's football. It's just a name. Why is this a significant issue?
Vanessa here. I feel like it would be different if it said like Native American Indians, if that was like what they were calling it. but he made a really good point that Redskins from the beginning of time has been a racial slur
Right.
against their race and their cultural ways of doing things. So the Redskins, even before, and then when they talked about what, I forget what she said, but she said, oh, you can't force honor on somebody. So they keep saying it that they're honoring them. And
Right.
quite frankly, if you're trying to honor someone by calling them a derogatory name, that just seems wrong. And then they didn't ask to be honored that way. And if you're trying to honor Native American Indians who we stripped everything from, and it was complete genocide, and if it's almost insulting that that's the way they would try to honor them, is by naming an American football team after a racial slur.
First of all, we know the name is a racial slur. Second, the response to that is, well, I don't think of it as a racial slur. I didn't know it was a racial slur. And what are you getting down on me for using a racial slur for when I don't mean it as a racial slur? I don't think it's calling somebody a name. Of course, it doesn't really matter what you think when you're using it. It matters what the target group thinks. And it's like if I were to call the women in this room chick or babe or whatever, you'd be deeply offended. I say, well, what are you doing? I don't mean anything by that. I'm trying to be complimentary. Well, right away that's bullshit. And by the way, that's my first swear word of the night at an hour and 2 minutes. But the second point is, not only is it racial slur, but think about it this way. This is Daniel Snyder, the owner of the Washington franchise, makes millions of dollars per year off of this name. And by the way, he'll tell you, the reason I don't want to change name is because it would cost me a lot of money to rebrand the team, and there would be a lot of white backlash against it, to saying, God, we're being called racist again. We don't want to be called racist again. And I think he's got some legitimate, by the way, business reasons to fear this, but that still doesn't overcome the history of oppression. And Vanessa used the term genocide, right, which is a term that we typically use to refer to the extermination of the Jews in Europe in the mid-20th century, the extermination of Hutus by Tutsis in Rwanda. But we don't want to think about what we did to Native Americans as a genocide. Why don't we want to think about it that way? Why do we not want to think that we as a people tried to obliterate an entire race of human beings?
Yeah, this is
Oh,
Kylie.
sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kylie.
So I think one of the biggest things for me is that, like, when I was watching the video and stuff, was that when we think about like racism, it's always like whites versus blacks. We don't necessarily think about it as everything else. And then when someone is trying to tell you that, you're racist, I think it kind of comes back to the white fragility. And it's like, as soon as we admit that we were wrong, all of a sudden now everyone's a racist and all of this team's followers and everything. And we don't want to accept that. And so we want to keep racism assigned to just black and white.
There is, yes, you're right, Kylie. Here's a couple of things. First of all, we don't want to think we're bad people.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to think that our ancestors acted improperly, because after all, we are God's chosen people. But here's yet, I think, a little bit more insidious reason for this. We do not have to confront these questions because we won. We did almost obliterate an entire race of people and consign the vast majority of those who remained to permanent poverty. Think about it for a second. We condemn the final solution of the Nazis against the Jews because we beat them. Had the Germans prevailed in World War II, the world would think completely differently about the Holocaust. History is written by victors. And when we didn't lose, we don't have to confront these questions. And so again, this is a matter of institutional and systemic racism. But of course, go to a Washington NFL franchise game and you'll see all these people wearing these t-shirts and jerseys and absolutely insisting that they have done nothing wrong and that, you know, members of various Native American tribes just need to get over it. That's one of the things that I hope a course like this gets you to think about. I realize we're a couple minutes over and I do want to get off because I don't want to take up too much of your time. Again, we're going into Module 8 again. The deadline will be next Thursday night, the 27th at 11:59. Please write in a gender, race, class media analysis, your third and final one for the course. And then we'll get together again next Wednesday night at 8. Does anyone have any last questions before we go? All right, I'm going to wrap things up and I'm stopping our recording now.